Hi everybody. This is my favourite photo of me. It was taken by Gabe over there. I'm showing you this because I wanted to make a really clear statement about my aesthetic interests. Because that'll help maybe make a point about what we're going to see a bit later. So this is really an artist talk and maybe an activist talk. I'm going to be quite quick and just go through a little story of a small group of community activists in Northern Illawarra finding themselves, and the way that visual communication played a role in that. I make comics. I make sort of trashy stories that might be considered climate fiction. My most recent graphic novel was really interested in like the lived experience of a grotty, slimy future Australia. I'm interested in like what the rhythm of life for like really foul teenagers is like, in a potential future, and that's kind of the grist of the fiction. And so the futures are like investigated through this kind of fun world building drawing sort of stuff, which is the thing that science fiction and fantasy authors and graphic novelists are really, really good at and really interested in. But I also am part of a group of activists who started out as an Extinction Rebellion project. So you know a little bit about my aesthetic interests now, but I'll say that my favorite activist poster of all time is this one here. So so I'm going into an activist space. Oh yeah, cool. I'm make some posters, and of course, like we started off with this meeting. One community member called a meeting and said, "Hey, we're interested in starting an Extinction Rebellion project in Northern Illawarra. Would who wants to come?" And hundreds and hundreds of people showed up to a room about as big as this one now. And I volunteered to be like a graphic recorder at the first meeting. And it was like wild and complicated, and there was all this stuff going on. And I've kind of been an environmental activist since I was 20, and I was feeling weird, all these weird upswellings of trauma, and all of the other activists who I knew from years ago, I was looking at and going, oh, you've got the same feeling that I'm feeling here. We're back in this organizing space and it doesn't feel very organized. And then the ideas that were coming out were like really fluffy, like flash mob, like that wasn't really like what I thought Extinction Rebellion, we're going to do. But I just kind of said, okay, I'm going to contribute to this movement through making graphics, which is the one thing I'm relatively powerful at. And so I started this kind of weekly sort of afternoon in our back shed where we would scramble to make graphics as quickly as we could, like sort of shonky, but hopefully graphically powerful, and enjoy each other's company and nourish each other's souls while we were doing it. And that worked well for that one time. And then COVID hit. And so in the middle of the pandemic, we decided to start doing street art projects. So this group of actors was a little bit lost, and we're trying to find our voice. And there was all sorts of interesting projects that all seemed to be about art and community. And so standing on top of the pavilion at Thirroul, like drawing what other people in the group told me to draw, we kind of came up with this Mother Earth thing, which I would never do. I honestly it's not like, and so it's this image that I don't feel like belongs to me at all. And we kind of did this this sort of outline, and on Mother's Day the community came in and showed their support for climate action through colouring this thing in. It ended up being quite beautiful. And then we did another one, and we got caught by the police doing this one, and we went to court. And that took a year to get past. And it sort of continued to sort of, as you can see, the kind of aesthetic stuff is starting to galvanize. And then at one point I just said, you know what, I'm not going to put the Extinction Rebellion in this logo in this next thing. And suddenly for me that felt right. Suddenly I was like, oh, okay, so I think we've finally maybe found some kind of graphic, a graphic that matches this community group and what we're actually doing. And we did these sort of like fuzzy community-based like events, and there's very parenthood focused, but they were really, really, really great, and they happened sort of over and over and over again. And then lots of protests outside of the Russell Vale coal mine using graphics that different artists had made. And finally, like, this is kind of 2 years later, we've gone through the pandemic, and we arrived at this point, this artwork on the left by Mignon Steele, who's, you know, another sort of artist, you know, who's a satellite of this project. And the group printed like hundreds of these on core flute during the election. And I don't know how or why, but everybody in the community knew who was behind this campaign, and because it wasn't party driven and it was an expression of this kind of graphic sort of project that we'd been doing for a long time, every shop front in town and so many houses had this out the front of their house, and it was actually a wild presence. You know, like, it was a really powerful kind of like, oh wow, this is a real, climate is the issue in this community, and I think that was to me like a great sort of end point to this cycle of a small group of activists finding themselves through, you know, and part of that was you know, this kind of finding a graphic voice for this. And so the group's now moved on to this project called Electrify 2515, which is this kind of amazing. They're trying. There's a funding body that's putting millions and millions of dollars into this prospect of electrifying one neighbourhood as a test case to see how it goes. And so it's kind of, and that feels like the perfect project for this bunch of activists who kind of galvanized around this idea of Extinction Rebellion that didn't quite feel right for us. And so yeah, that's my that's my story really quickly. Should we go on to Megan? Yeah, or do you want to go? Yeah.
Okay, let's figure this out. Okay, hi, I'm Megan, and today I'm going to be giving you a brief intro into Tracing Afterlives, which was a project I did as part of a master's in 2019 to 2021. So basically, in a nutshell, my master's looked at how to use plastics like that to communicate the deep time longevity of plastic. So these were plastics that were collected off the oceans of Narrowland near Whitsundays in Queensland, and they were collected by this organisation called EcoBarge Clean Seas, who regularly goes out on trips in that area in the ocean to clean up plastic marine debris from the ocean. And when I first kind of found out that they were collecting plastics, and more particularly that they were collecting plastics that looked like this a lot, I got really, really excited, and I went up there to visit them and to take some of these plastics that they had collected. And I was just really kind of excited by these warped plastics because they didn't really look like plastic anymore. They didn't look like the consumer items you'd find in a store, and they didn't really look like litter either. So to me, these plastics really felt alive. The way that the material had warped over time in the ocean really kind of indicated to me that plastics can live, and also they can adapt to their surroundings. And to me, they were a really powerful visual reminder that plastics continue to exist even after disposal. They never really disappear. So I went into the beginning of Tracing Afterlives really questioning how to present the plastics that I collected in a way that would make these concepts really tangible to other people. So I started off like any kind of visual communicator, automatically like going for the photography, the camera, being like, oh my God, like this is like happening, this is evidence, let's put it out there as widely as we can and disseminate it like everywhere. I got to the point though after this where I was like, cool, like I've taken some really, really nice photos, but I was like, so what? And even when I was showing like friends on Instagram photos of the plastic, they were like, oh, like that's really cool. Those are like really cool plastics, so beautiful. And I was like, that is not the point at all. So I kind of pivoted and I experimented with creative writing and speculative fiction. Here's just like some work in progress shots. And basically I was just trying to experiment with a form where I could really anthropomorphically explore the potential lives that these plastics had led and also that they could lead, and really trying to imagine their experiences and step into their point of view. So one of the things that was really successful about this form of creation was this one key insight I had, and it was particularly around trying to imagine the future lives of these plastics. And it was basically just because I had collected these plastics and they were technically now safe and in my living room, where they still are to this day, by the way, it doesn't mean that their stories are over. Particularly when I die, they'll have to go somewhere else. And it was this kind of point that I really, really realized that we don't have a solution to plastics. Like when I'm dead, they'll have to go somewhere else, probably landfill, and they'll either stay in landfill or they'll keep moving from place to place, maybe changing forms a bit, but there will inevitably always be plastic. So that was really powerful for me in this process. And another thing I realized was that simply giving people these stories to read or to look at wouldn't ever be enough. Same with the photographs, like they'd probably forget about it after a bit. It was the main thing in this process for me was the many kind of existential crises that playing with the plastics and thinking about their futures had brought out in me, the kind of idea of just how long these plastics would exist for after I'm gone, like generations and generations of humans, essentially. So I decided I had to bring out these conclusions in other people by kind of imitating the same process that I went through of playing with and future mapping the plastics. So I designed a series of workshops where I basically did really annoying things, like I asked participants what they would do if I gave them a piece of the plastic to take home with them that day. And then I basically just kept asking, what now? Until we reached a point in time where they would prospectively be dead. And then I just kept asking, what now? Until they got mad, essentially. Yeah, and then I also did things like ask them where they think one of the pieces of plastic in front of them would be in 1 year, 10 years, 100 years, and 1,000 years' time. And here are some of their responses. As you can see, the further up in time we go, the more like creative they get. Because they're like, oh, I don't know, like just shoot it off into space. I don't care anymore. So what I found from those workshops was that people get really uncomfortable and really anxious when you give them something that they can't get rid of, not even when they're dead, which was really, really great to me because it kind of proved that some of the participants' understanding, conventional understanding of what plastic is and how it behaves, and even in like a larger part what waste is and how waste behaves, was being challenged. And it also kind of proved to me that even though we all know that plastic is disposable, like we get told it over and over and over again, is not disposable. Did I say disposable? Not disposable. We don't really truly understand what that means. But one thing I learned was that if we ask speculative questions about what plastic waste is and think about the future of plastic into deep time, we can uncover like ways and methods of truly grappling with just how long they really live for. That's me.
Thanks, and I'm just going to whip through a couple of things because we wanted to end this session in here on some speculative narratives before we invite everyone to go across to Building 2. We're currently in Building 8. There's no rhyme or reason to how the numbers work, but we can make a kind of caravan of courage to find our way over there. where we have a show reel of work from image makers who've spoken today and some other people from our community as well up on a screen. And Andrew Burrell is also going to do a performance of a speculative piece that has to do with extinction over there. Because we haven't given people very much opportunity to ask questions during the session today because we wanted to cram so much in. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about playing around with visual communication as a way to bridge gaps between science and fiction, between scientists and storytellers. So one of the first things that I started doing when I started thinking about how we visualize things that are difficult to see or understand was I was finding it really difficult to engage with climate science myself. And so when I was finding it hard to read academic papers or even popular science, I decided I'd start reading fiction. And I've brought up Margaret Atwood a little bit, but she was one of the first climate writers that I ever read, and her Mad Adam trilogy is not kind of touted as climate fiction, but it certainly is. And one of the things that I was looking at is how close her writing was to the scientific research that she based it upon. So I looked at all of the animals, the hybrid animals that go through those novels, and I started to try and visualize them to get people to understand how strange some of the genetic manipulation is that we do. And then I moved from there to start thinking about how if we can't try and explain science in ways that makes a great deal of sense to people, could we unsettle them or make them feel uncomfortable enough about it to ask different questions themselves, which is very much what Megan's work is doing as well with the plastics. And actually one of Megan's plastics that I love the most is the toothbrush. And to say that I love it is a really difficult thing. It's viscerally horrific, and it has these little bits of kind of coral and algae growing on it. And when Megan talks about it, she asks you to think about, and so I'm going to steal your line, because that's what good teachers do to their students, sorry. But I'd like everyone in the room to think about the first toothbrush you ever had when you first started brushing your first 2 or 3 teeth, and then think about every toothbrush that you've ever used since then. And all of those toothbrushes will live longer than you do if you use plastic toothbrushes. But for me, that kind of horror, that kind of visualizing the invisible is a really important part of what we do as image makers. And so sometimes I work independently and sometimes collaboratively. And this is a project where I'm working collaboratively with another image maker, Katie Dean. And we worked in a really collaborative way with a group of editors on a natural history book. It's a collection of essays about, I guess it's kind of decolonizing colonial history, particularly in Mesoamerica and the Middle East, I guess what it is called now. I find it hard to say this because it's from a different century, but this is a series of 12 collages that we created, and there's one collage which acts as a kind of chapter plate illustration for each of the 12 chapters in the book. And we had to work with the author and the editors to talk through some of the key ideas about the visual material that they worked with from different archives and how we could rearrange, reassemble and reimagine some of that archival material in order to form a kind of visual synopsis or summary of some of the things that they were working with. But also in the way we created the images and spoke about them, we were talking about some of the problems with the way images were created and archived historically. So this is one example. This is about explorers going in and collecting pitcher plants and the relationship between the kind of atrocities that were committed in collecting those specimens and to the First Nations people that they were going in and apparently working with, but in fact kind of extracting their lives as well as their plants. And then the difficulty of getting those specimens back to Europe without them becoming, I don't know if you've ever seen a herbivarium sheet of something like a pitcher plant, but it goes from being an incredibly vivid, beautiful flower to looking like the sole of an old shoe. So trying to play around with some of that. And the first response when these are kind of sketches that we'd pitch, and they said, we really like some of the ideas of the cannibalism and the hidden things, and you capturing the monstrosity, but not the kind of the vividness of the world that these things are extracted from. So we did another kind of sketch, and all of this is over Zoom because the editors and authors were all in the Northern Hemisphere, and we put this one up that we just kind of started to stitch together saying this is what could happen, and everyone went really quiet on the Zoom, and I was like, is it too phallic? And they said, no, it's Haeckel, it's Ernst Haeckel. You're using images from Ernst Haeckel, and anyone who knows these archives will know that. And he's a eugenist. Oh, I've said that incorrectly, but basically he has a horrifically racist worldview. And they just said to us, there are so many image makers from those archives and historically who do incredible work. Can we just not ever use his images again? And so it was a really great conversation to be kind of schooled on the ethics of images from the historians, and it was a really great process. So they gave us access to all of these different archives from different people that we could use, and the image on, I don't know if it's your left or right, but the main image is the one that we ended up creating that does tell the story of the danger of going into those jungles and the kind of the horror that was in there. It alludes to it, but we learnt a really interesting lesson. And so this is one of the stories of collaborating with these people, and I tell you this, I guess, because in this process, what I enjoyed most over almost 2 years of working was that we had really difficult conversations, and we had to be told that we were wrong. Every single piece of every collage had to be from the right country, region, and not just century, like era. There was so much research that went into this, but the authenticity of those was really important, and the constantly needing to be humble and get things wrong and making decisions that were aesthetic but not ethically correct is a process that has to happen by thinking with a whole bunch of different people. So I think the importance of working with image makers is important in terms of thinking about it as always being a collaboration. And that the conversations, and Dita brought this up when someone asked about, how do we put image makers or designers at the beginning of the process rather than making them service designers that perform a kind of duty at the end. You have to find people to work with who you are brave enough to say, I hate that, that's wrong, you've spent 40 hours doing that and it's unusable. And you have to have image makers who can suck it up and say, yep, my first version was better, but I'm happy to go with the right one. So conversations are important, networking is important, and being part of communities where you can find each other and make those connections is super important. So I guess that's my last little plug before I give the mic back to you, Pat, to just say thanks to the Sydney Environment Institute for making a space where different groups can come together. And we're really hoping that at the School of Design at UTS we can be more part of that, and we have a lot of great people that we work with, and also in Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences and our former students like Megan. We have this great community and network of people, so come and talk to us.
How long are we going for? 5 minutes. I'm interested in story's ability to address deep time in a way, and I love that you used the term and then what happened and then what, and you also use the term sort of if so, or these or what if, these are the, for me, these are the stories my creative writing teachers would have asked me about, developing story ideas and exploring concepts through stories. Are you doing any other kind of investigations of deep time through any of your other work, or?
Not currently, no. It's just that main one. But the questions of what now and then what, they came really naturally from the process of just being with the plastics. And just thinking about okay, they're here in my living room now. What am I going to do with them now that I've collected them? It almost felt like I had a responsibility now that I had taken them out of certain environments to do something with them. But then, even if I did something with them in my lifetime, they'd still be there even afterwards. So it was just that realization and what now? which I just decided to ask to people and annoy them. Yeah.
What's the difference between design featuring and speculative storytelling? Is there like a way to sort of break those two things apart, or are they, are they just the same kind of dreaming in different physical forms? Right. Well, I was always confused by the concept of featuring, and I was like, I don't understand why all these business people and design people are talking about featuring. And then I kind of realized, like, because I kind of grown up in a lower middle class family, and I was just read science fiction like crazy, that featuring is just thought. It's just the kind of daydreaming that I've been drawn to all my life, and that's when it kind of made sense to me. But I do think there's a kind of approach that a writer might, the kind of featuring that a writer might do, that's different from something that like Megan would do.
Yeah, I think I like the term speculative more because there's no pressure. You're just wandering a bit in your mind, and you don't really have to like formalize anything, and it just is kind of a beautiful experiment.
One of the things Rebecca was talking about at the start of this whole, it feels like we've been here for a very long time, but at the beginning, Rebecca was talking about how we imagine ourselves into climate affected but still livable futures. And for me, that's a really interesting kind of proposition, because I think that then I understand the role of storytelling and the role of translating science to non-experts and the role of image makers in that process. And so I don't really care if it's called like futuring or speculation or any of the other things. It's like, how do we get people to imagine into those spaces? And I think that that's one thing that, that's sort of the definition of design, is making something that doesn't already exist. So thinking about talking to the people who do that well is more important to me than figuring out what the terms are. But the language can be really useful to know that other people are calling the same thing, or that, what you're doing a different term. I find it really hard to find, especially as an academic, it can be really hard to find other people working in your space when you don't know what their language is.
I always thought, like, communicating with the broader public, like in terms of meteorology or political economy or ecological economy, like is a really hard sell. But I feel like storytelling has a capacity to like describe like the texture of life in a speculative future or in a climate future, and I think that can be really powerful, for and against, like good climate policy. Like I'm always really distressed at that not enough storytellers have really thought about like what fun looks like in the future, and what romance looks like in the future, and what all these things that are really important to people like look like as our oceans rise, and because there will be fun, like we will fall in love, but we will, all of these things that we value in life will still be there, but the texture of them will be different. And I think like ways of knowing that fiction can provide for us, really have only just started to give us access to that kind of speculative thinking. I like the toothbrush better after many years of being discarded. Everyone says it's horrible, but it's beautiful.
Yeah, it kind of, I think both our works, and Zoe, a bit yours as well, it like crosses into a bit of the territory of like ruin porn without fully being ruin porn.
I prefer squalor porn, or, just ruins are very dry, I like a bit of a sheen.
Let's wrap. Great. Thank you so much for coming, and please do join us as we go over to Building 2. It's basically on Broadway when you're looking at Central Park, at the green building that's very on brand for this talk today. Just that open area there with the large screen. We'd love to see you there, but hang around and ask questions. We have taken recordings, and if anyone would like access to them, please email me. Otherwise, thank you very much for being here today.